Meanwhile, as tensions on the Russia-Ukraine border continue to simmer, the United West has now threatened to impose never-seen-before sanctions on Moscow if Russia were to carry out an invasion into Ukraine. And now, amidst these threats and Russia's firm deployment along its eastern border, the specifics of these sanctions has got the world guessing. Now, over the course of the next few minutes, we'll tell you as to what punitive measures America and also its Western allies, predominantly in Europe, have got as a plan to counter Moscow. The sanctioning individuals via asset freezes and also travel bans are the most commonly used tool. If Russia were to decide to invade into Ukraine, then the West will most likely impose targeted curbs against certain individuals in Russia, including the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this is what the American President Joe Biden has said, that he's ready to consider personal sanctions against his Russian counterpart in case Vladimir Putin decides to go ahead with the invasion. Recently, a bill was unveiled by the US Senate Democrats that foresees sweeping sanctions on the top Russian officials, both military and government. Moscow has said that any such measures against the Russian president will not harm him personally, but will prove to be politically destructive for the West.
US President Joe Biden has raised the possibility of imposing personal sanctions upon Vladimir Putin. That would be an extraordinary step. What form could those sanctions take is hard to say. I mean, there's no detail at this stage. It would be very difficult to target Mr. Putin's personal wealth because, as the Kremlin said today, officially speaking, he's not allowed to have any bank accounts or assets overseas. That's a rule in Russia, so the Kremlin says, it would be impossible to hurt Mr. Putin in that way. They have said that any kind of move like this would be politically destructive, but would be painless for Mr. Putin himself.
Another measure that is being considered will be to exclude Russia from the system that is known as SWIFT, a global financing messaging service that is used by many thousands of financial institutions in more than 200 different countries. This is not the first time that the possibility of cutting off Russian access to SWIFT is being mulled. Back in 2014, when Russia had annexed Crimea, there were similar whispers that had prompted Russia to come up with its own financial messaging system called the SPFS. However, the Russian alternative has failed to establish itself in the international transactions. Cutting off access to SWIFT is amongst the harshest of measures that the West can in fact contemplate at this point of time. And it has the capability of inflicting some pretty big self-harm as well. Now, experts say that the United States and Germany will stand to lose the most from this move, as their banks are the most frequent SWIFT users with Russian banks. This sanction was used against Iran back in 2012, and the country lost significant oil revenue and a large chunk of foreign trade. The United States could bar Russia from financial transactions involving American dollars. Essentially, any Western firm that allowed a Russian institution to deal in dollars will face penalties. And this could also have a huge impact on Russia's economy, as much of its oil and gas sales are settled in dollars. The next are the energy and technology restrictions. Now, the Russian economy is hugely dependent on selling gas, predominantly to Europe and to other nations. The sales are a huge source of revenue for the Kremlin. The West could, of course, make it illegal for countries and companies to purchase oil and gas from Russian energy giants such as Gazprom and Rosneft. If such sanctions are imposed, then the Nord Stream 2 pipeline stands to be abandoned. The White House has also told the U.S. chip industry to be ready for new restrictions on exports to Russia if Moscow decides to go ahead with the incursion into Ukraine. The warning also included potentially blocking Russia's access to global electronics supplies. The Western powers could take action to further block Russia's access to international debt markets. The ability of Western institutions and banks to purchase Russian bonds is already restricted. In April 2021, Biden barred U.S. investors from buying new Russian ruble bonds over the accusation of election meddling. The move, if taken, will deprive Russia of access to finance that it needs to grow its economy. The country's cost of borrowing might also rise, and the value of the ruble might plummet in case these sanctions are imposed. Leaders of the European Union, along with the United States, have been holding talks and they're mulling possible action. But the burning question, of course, is when and under what circumstances will the West decide to go ahead with the sanctions on Russia?
As far as I remember, the Congress has already discussed a couple of years ago the possible sanctions against Putin. And again, everybody puts a cause. So Russia has to do something terrible on the territory of Ukraine for these sanctions to kick in and to come into force. And again, I doubt that Russia is planning something terrible, and I doubt that the war is actually the military solution is actually on the table.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.